and dance are all in one,
specifically in the arts.
taking risks.
Photography.
In the arts world.
The language is ASL.
Deaf what? Interview.
Digital originals.
Landon Krentz.
When I was about 10 years old, I got a cochlear implant after growing up as a deaf oral person. My parents wanted to teach me sign language, but it conflicted with society's expectations when it comes to language acquisition for deaf children. My parents were convinced to go down with the oral method because if we want to receive financial support for speech therapy, otherwise it would be cut off. I moved to Vancouver because I wanted to live in a bigger city, where there was a large deaf community compared to Saskatchewan. When I went to elementary school in Saskatchewan, I was not allowed to use sign language. If we were caught using sign language, we would be punished. When I was about 9 years old, a teacher found out that I was using sign language. The teacher hit my hands with a ruler and broke all of my fingers. So that's why I struggle with producing some signs. When I moved to Vancouver, BC, I learned about the deaf community here, which is much bigger than it is in Saskatchewan. So when I was born, the Saskatchewan School for the Deaf had already closed, which means that many deaf people moved away for other opportunities, leaving us isolated without the deaf community around, meaning that our exposure faded. It's a personal goal of mine to get the recognition we need to become more established so that we can have sign language on stage. It's important to include the intersection of access.
Welcome to Deaf What? Interview. The last time we did this interview together was back when you were living in Vancouver, BC. And now you're living in Calgary, Alberta, so what have you been up to these past few years?
Hi Sage, thanks for hosting this interview. I really enjoy working with you. Since leaving Vancouver and moving to Calgary, there have been a lot of major changes in my life. I was hired to work in a full-time position with Inside Out Theatre, as there was a need for deaf theatre in this city. They needed someone with production skills background. Knowledge of writing, and an interest in the arts. Inside Out Theatre had difficulty finding someone who was a good match until they met me. I gave up my life in Vancouver because the cost of living was increasing and becoming way too expensive to maintain. The arts community in Vancouver is different than it is here in Calgary. So I moved here for that reason.
Hey, can you tell me more about art opportunities in Calgary?
Sure. Well, I feel that Calgary's arts development are municipal city government funders is one of the most progressive funding bodies I've ever seen. I've experienced many challenges with the BC Arts Council as they require a non-profit organizational status, which created barriers for individuals. Here in the deaf community in Calgary, local governments allow for individuals to apply for grants and really invest more time towards deaf artists. So far, I'm the first and only deaf person who has applied. These applications have been successful, and I'm thankful. There are some changes happening in the arts community to include deaf artists. There's money available ready to support deaf artists here in Calgary, so that's the key difference.
Wow. That's really great. It's really important to ignite change somewhere and create an impact for a future generation of deaf artists. So tell me more about the projects that you've been working on these past few years. Come on, tell me.
Oh my gosh, there's so many to name. I've accomplished quite a lot, and I'm privileged to have access to work with these grants, even if writing is a barrier. I usually hire a grant writer to support my writing process, which has been effective thus far. I've been working on multiple projects. I've traveled to France 2 times to attend Clindoy, a deaf international theater festival with acts from all over the world. During my time there, I launched a number of deaf theater projects. I also started my first signed opera with the first art workshop in Vancouver. From that experience, I learned so much throughout that process. It allowed me to play with composing music, overlapping sign language. It was quite a complicated process, wow. So I became a composer, working with librettos, weaving a story together, and developing a play at the same time. I took on so many roles. Then I had my second workshop where I realized that I was still learning more about the writing process and the development of a play. I worked with professional mentors who were able to guide me through the process. There were plenty of goals to chase and a lot to learn still. I realized I still need more training along with professional development. I recently completed a writing script called 100 Years of Darkness, a story about Alexander Graham Bell and the idea of analyzing whether a language itself can be good or evil. It conflicted between speaking English and using sign language. I was fortunate to work with a wonderful team that brought so many ideas and sharing what makes sense in the storyline to make sure it's clear to the audience. These projects are what I've been working on thus far. In addition to these experiences, I've been doing a bit of traveling, learning about deaf theater, meeting deaf mentors, etc. There have been a lot of changes since we've met with Deaf What.
This is really amazing. I'm so glad that you're doing this type of work. It's so important. We need more collaborations and connections, so we really need to start somewhere.
Yes, I agree.
Wow. The next question is, what are your goals for the future of the deaf arts community?
My next goal is to uplift the deaf community here in Canada. I also want to gain professional experience to teach what I've learned about creating deaf theater and what that truly means here in Canada. I've noticed a lot of scenarios where many deaf people experience theater from a hearing perspective. So where's the deaf perspective? It's a personal goal of mine to bring deaf experts into their own areas of specialization in various theatrical formats such as physical mime, music, nonverbal, other sign languages, and many more. There's something I want to plan once COVID is over. I will hire these experts and fly them in and provide training to our deaf artists and our hearing allies.
Yes, oftentimes we don't have the chance to actually witness and experience deaf theater. The norm is to hire a deaf actor to perform in a mainstream production, and it relies strongly on hearing perspective, or shadowed by sign language interpretation. We want to put aside the focus on bringing sign language interpretation. The theater should be focused on deaf art.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm curious if you have any advice for aspiring deaf artists. They're trying to break down barriers to navigate the world of art. Anything you can say?
My advice for deaf artists in the community looking at deaf is to look at deaf-led projects as a value. To try and advocate for the idea instead of booking interpreters for theater and hiring hearing people to take on deaf roles. Awareness about cultural appropriation and sign language is becoming more widespread in the arts community. If you're willingly ignorant about this issue, then you're a product of autism. Cultural appropriation has a significant impact in the deaf community, especially those who are striving to use sign language. It's important to look at the deaf-led projects as an effective tool to resolve issues that may arise when working in hearing and deaf artists. Just to really advocate for more deaf-led projects and challenge hearing people to open their minds, open up their hearts to be a part of the work. One thing I need to mention is that if you don't know how to apply for funding for your project as a deaf artist, you will experience challenges if you don't know how to obtain grants. When hearing people hire you to work, you don't have much power and control over your artistic vision. So if you don't want to apply for grants, you need to adhere to their vision and not yours.
Yes, thank you for your advice. It's especially important to hire deaf artists to perform for deaf roles.
Absolutely.
For us, it's important to be patient with hearing artists when collaborating on projects. Keeping a balance to focus on deaf-led productions and, of course, writing grants are essential. I would like to thank the Canadian Council of the Arts for supporting this project to continue the Deaf What series. Landon, thank you for your time for this interview.
Thank you, Sage, for your time as well.
Bye. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.